The sound of small footsteps echoed through Seoul's most prestigious tech building at 11 p.m. 5-year-old Temi burst around the corner, her tiny legs carrying her fast through the marble corridors, her voice echoing off the glass walls as she called out desperately, "Daddy! Daddy!" 2 uniformed security guards ran after her, their boots thundering against the polished floors, speaking rapidly in Korean, their faces showing confusion, concern, and growing alarm at this unprecedented security breach. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and CEO Park Ji Hune stepped out, his expensive suit wrinkled from another grueling 16-hour workday, his tie loosened, exhaustion etched around his eyes. He stopped mid-stride, briefcase in hand, as a small Nigerian girl with the brightest, most curious eyes he'd ever seen crashed into his legs with surprising force, her small arms wrapping around him like he was exactly who she'd been searching for. "Daddy!" Temi exclaimed, looking up at him with pure joy. If you think a child's innocent mistake could change 2 lives forever, wait until you see what happened when little Temi called a stranger, "Daddy," in a language he didn't understand. Before we dive deeper into this heart-wrenching story, subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna for more emotionally powerful tales. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please share this with someone who believes in love conquering all. Now, let's go back to how it all began. I didn't know it then, but that night would change everything, not just for us, but for a man who had forgotten what family felt like. My name is Ada, and I'm a 28-year-old single mother from Lagos who moved to Seoul 3 years ago chasing dreams that seemed impossible back home. The transition had been harder than I'd ever imagined, learning Korean, navigating complex visa requirements, finding work that would support us both. Every night at 9 p.m., I put on my cleaning uniform with its company logo and head to Technova Industries, one of Korea's most successful technology companies. The pay is decent enough to cover our small apartment rent, the building is pristine and modern, and most importantly, nobody asks too many questions about my immigration status or my struggles with the more complex aspects of Korean bureaucracy. But that Tuesday night was different. My usual babysitter, Mrs. Kim from the apartment next door, had called at the last minute with a family emergency, and I couldn't afford to miss work. Rent was due in 3 days, and Temi needed new school supplies. So I made a desperate decision that would change our lives forever. I brought my 5-year-old daughter Temi with me to work, knowing full well it violated every company policy in the employee handbook. Temi had never known her biological father. He'd disappeared from our lives before her 2nd birthday, leaving behind only a forwarding address that led nowhere and promises that turned to dust. Since she learned to talk, she'd called every kind man she met "Daddy," the grocery store clerk who smiled at her and always gave her a free lollipop, the bus driver who waited patiently for us to board even when we were running late, even the elderly man at the nearby park who shared his crackers with the pigeons and had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. It was innocent, heartbreaking, and completely natural for a little girl searching for that missing piece in her world, that father figure she'd constructed in her imagination from fragments of kindness from strangers. CEO Park Ji Hune was 32 and had inherited Technova when his parents died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Raised by his traditional grandmother after becoming an orphan at 27, he'd thrown himself into work with single-minded determination. Success came easily, but connection, real human connection, had become foreign. Looking back now, I realize some connections are destined, even when they begin with a child's innocent mistake. While I was methodically cleaning the executive floors that night, working my way through the maze of corner offices with their floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Seoul skyline, Temi had been playing quietly in the janitorial supply closet with her worn coloring books and a small box of crayons I'd brought from home. I'd made her a comfortable little nest with cleaning rags and my spare jacket, and she'd seemed content drawing pictures of houses with too many windows and families with stick-figure parents holding hands. But curiosity got the better of her, as it always did, and she wandered out into the maze of identical corridors, quickly becoming lost in the building's confusing layout of intersecting hallways that all looked exactly the same to a 5-year-old's eyes. She was scared, alone, and doing what any 5-year-old would do, looking for someone who felt safe. When the elevator opened and she saw Ji Hune, something in his gentle eyes made her think of the father figure she'd been unconsciously seeking her entire life. "Are you lost, little one?" Ji Hune asked in Korean, his voice instinctively softening. Temi didn't understand the words, but she understood kindness. In her limited Korean mixed with English, she pointed down the hallway and said, "Mama work there. You help me find Mama, Daddy?" The word hit Ji Hune like a physical blow. No child had ever called him that. He'd never even held a child before. But something about this little girl's trust and the way she looked at him like he could solve all her problems awakened something he didn't know existed inside him. "Okay," he said gently, taking her small hand. "Let's find your mama." The security guards who'd been chasing Temi were stunned to see their CEO holding hands with the cleaning lady's daughter, speaking to her in the soft, patient tone they'd never heard him use. When they found me frantically searching the building, my heart nearly stopped. Not because Temi was missing, I could see she was safe, but because she was holding hands with the most powerful man in the building. "I'm so sorry, sir," I said in my best Korean, bowing deeply. She wandered off. "It won't happen again." But Ji Hune surprised everyone in that hallway, including himself. "It's perfectly fine," he said, then knelt down to Temi's level. "What's your name?" "Temi," she said proudly, then pointed at me. "That's my mama, Ada." For reasons I still don't fully understand, Ji Hune smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. That should have been my first warning that something extraordinary was beginning. Over the following weeks, something magical began to unfold. Ji Hune found himself staying later and later at the office, always seeming to have urgent work that coincidentally needed his attention whenever my shift began at 9 p.m. The building's executive floor would usually be empty by 7, but Ji Hune would find reasons to review quarterly reports, respond to international emails, or analyze market projections that somehow required his personal attention until well past midnight. Temi would run to him the moment she spotted his familiar figure, her face lighting up with unbridled joy, and he'd light up in a way that transformed his entire demeanor, melting years of corporate coldness from his features. "Daddy Ji Hune," she'd call out in her sweet, high voice, mixing English and Korean in her own special language that somehow transcended the barriers between two vastly different cultures. He never corrected her, never reminded her that he wasn't actually her father. Instead, he started bringing small, thoughtful gifts, coloring books with Korean characters for her to learn, traditional Korean snacks that introduced her to new flavors, little toys that made her giggle with pure delight. He'd sit cross-legged on the floor of his pristine corner office, his expensive suit forgotten, while she drew elaborate pictures with crayons, listening to her chatter about her day with the same intense focus and attention he usually reserved for board meetings and international conference calls. "What's this?" he'd ask, pointing to her drawings. "That's you, that's Mama, that's me." Temi would explain, showing him crayon families that always included all three of us. I watched their bond grow with wonder and worry. Ji Hune was teaching Temi Korean words, while she taught him English phrases with infectious enthusiasm. He'd never had siblings, never been around children, but with Temi, he was natural, patient, and genuinely happy. "Mama," Temi asked me one night as we walked home, "why doesn't Daddy Ji Hune come to our house?" How do you explain to a 5-year-old that there are invisible barriers between people? That some connections feel perfect but are complicated by things like social class, cultural differences, and corporate hierarchies? "Uncle Ji Hune is very busy with important work," I told her, though my heart ached saying it. But I was falling for him too. Not just for his gentleness with Temi, but for the way he looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. He'd ask about my day, remember details about my life, and speak to me with the same respect he showed his executives. In his presence, I didn't feel like just a cleaning lady, I felt seen. Something inside me whispered this couldn't last, but watching them together felt like seeing pieces of a puzzle finally fit. The office had started to notice. Colleagues whispered about the CEO's unusual schedule, about why he was always on the same floor as the cleaning crew. I caught glimpses of curiosity, confusion, and sometimes disapproval when they saw Temi running to greet him. I didn't know it then, but the storm was already gathering. 3 weeks after that first encounter, everything changed. I was emptying trash bins near the break room when I heard familiar voices speaking in rapid Korean. I'd learned enough to understand key phrases, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Have you seen how he acts around that foreign woman's child? It's inappropriate. What will the board think? Someone should report this. It's affecting his professional image. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, as the conversation continued. They were talking about anonymous complaints to HR, about unprofessional favoritism toward cleaning staff, about how Ji Hune's behavior was becoming a distraction. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I walked past the security office and saw multiple monitors displaying high-definition footage from the past weeks, footage of Ji Hune kneeling on the floor to play with Temi, of our conversations in the hallway, of moments I'd thought were private and sacred between the three of us. Our faces were clearly visible on screen, captured from multiple angles by the building's comprehensive surveillance system, as the security supervisor and HR director sat in leather chairs discussing what they called the situation that needs immediate handling. They spoke about us like we were a virus that had infected their perfect corporate ecosystem. I realized with devastating, heart-crushing clarity that we weren't people to them. We were a problem to be solved, a stain to be removed, an inconvenience that threatened the carefully maintained order of their business world. Standing there, watching myself and my daughter being analyzed like security threats, I felt something shatter inside me. All those beautiful moments, Ji Hune teaching Temi to write Korean characters, Temi sharing her snacks with him, the way he'd look at both of us like we were precious, all of it was being reduced to inappropriate workplace behavior. I told myself I was overreacting, that Ji Hune would never let anything happen to us. But I couldn't shake the image of us being discussed like an infection that needed to be removed from his perfect corporate world. That moment still haunts me, the way my heart knew before my mind did. Have you ever felt that chill when something just wasn't right? Tell me in the comments if you've been there too. Your story might help someone else see the signs. Despite my growing fears and the whispers that seemed to follow us through the building's corridors, I couldn't bring myself to end what was happening between us. The connection was too precious, too rare, too life-changing for all three of us. Ji Hune had started bringing Korean children's books for Temi, beautiful illustrated stories that he would read to her in both languages, watching her face light up with understanding as she began to recognize characters and sounds. He was helping her develop language skills that would serve her entire life, opening doors to opportunities I'd never imagined possible, and more importantly, he was giving her something I'd never been able to provide despite all my love and sacrifice, a father figure who genuinely cared about her happiness, her growth, her dreams for the future. "Look, Mama," Temi would say, showing me Korean characters she'd learned. "Daddy Ji Hune says I'm very smart." And he was changing too. The cold, distant CEO I'd observed from afar was becoming warmer, more human. He'd tell us stories about his childhood with his grandmother, about growing up without parents, about how lonely success could be. In return, I shared stories about Nigeria, about raising Temi alone, about the dreams that had brought us to Korea. "You're brave," he told me one evening as we watched Temi color. "Braver than any CEO I know." "I don't feel brave," I admitted. "I feel like I'm constantly one mistake away from losing everything." "You're not," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made me want to believe him. But the corporate world was closing in around us. I received a formal written warning about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. The other cleaning staff started treating me differently, some with resentment, others with pity. I was becoming isolated in my own workplace. Ji Hune was facing pressure too. His assistant mentioned that board members were asking questions about his scheduled changes. His grandmother had started questioning why he was working such unusual hours. The business partners who'd helped build Technova were expressing concerns about his focus. I should have walked away when I heard what the executives were saying. But I stayed, because Temi had never been this happy, and because I was falling in love with a man who saw us both as family. The breaking point came during a routine board meeting that turned into an intervention. HR Director Kim had compiled a detailed report about Ji Hune's inappropriate workplace relationships, complete with security footage and documented complaints from staff. This behavior is affecting company morale, she announced to the board. Other employees feel there's favoritism, and our international partners are beginning to ask questions about leadership stability. Board Chairman Lee, who'd known Ji Hune since childhood, leaned forward with concern. Ji Hune, we're worried about you. This isn't like you to let personal matters interfere with business judgment. What personal matters? Ji Hune asked, though he knew exactly what they meant. The cleaning woman and her child. This obsession isn't healthy, and it's certainly not professional. The word obsession hit like a slap. What we'd built, the trust, the connection, the love that had grown between us, was being reduced to pathology. I care about them, Ji Hune said quietly. We understand, Chairman Lee said in that patronizing tone reserved for people having mental breakdowns. But caring has its place. You need to focus on finding an appropriate Korean wife, someone who can support your position in society. The room full of powerful men nodded in agreement, and Ji Hune felt the walls of his perfectly constructed corporate life closing in around him. Meanwhile, I was facing my own confrontation. The facility manager had called me into her office with an ultimatum disguised as concern. Ada, you're a good worker, but this situation with the CEO has to stop. Other staff members are complaining, and frankly, it's inappropriate. If it continues, we'll have no choice but to terminate your employment. The threat was clear: stay away from Ji Hune or lose my job. That night, I sat in our tiny apartment watching Temi play with the Korean books Ji Hune had given her, and I made the most painful decision of my life. I requested a shift change to day cleaning, knowing it would mean I'd never see him again. Why can't I see Daddy Ji Hune anymore? Temi asked when I explained we'd be working different hours. Uncle Ji Hune is very busy with important work, I said, the lie burning my throat. But children know when adults are hiding pain. Temi became quieter, more withdrawn. She'd ask for Ji Hune every day, and each time I had to break her heart a little more. Ji Hune, meanwhile, threw himself back into work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to forget. But success felt hollow now. Every evening, he'd find himself looking for us, remembering Temi's laughter echoing through the halls, missing the way I'd made him feel like a better version of himself. We were both miserable, but we'd convinced ourselves this separation was for the best. The crisis came 2 weeks later. Temi developed a fever that wouldn't break, and in her delirium, she kept calling for Daddy Ji Hune. No amount of medicine or comfort from me could soothe her. She'd cry his name in her sleep, asking why he didn't love her anymore, why he'd stopped coming to see us. Sitting in the hospital with my sick daughter, I realized how much damage I'd done by trying to protect her from a loss that had already happened. She'd bonded with Ji Hune as deeply as if he were her biological father, and my attempts to make her forget him were only causing more pain. At the same time, Ji Hune's grandmother was having her own realization. Park's grandmother had raised him after his parents' death, and she'd never seen him as happy as he'd been during those few weeks when he'd talked constantly about little Temi and her remarkable mother Ada. You've been miserable since you stopped seeing them, she observed one evening, watching him push food around his plate. It was inappropriate, he said, echoing the board's words. Bad for business. And is a business worth more than happiness? She asked in that direct way elderly Korean women perfect over decades. I have responsibilities. Your responsibility is to live a life worth living, she said. I didn't raise you to become a robot in an expensive suit. That conversation haunted him. Looking back now, I realized we were both learning the same lesson from different directions, that trying to protect someone by pushing them away often causes more harm than the original threat. I thought I was protecting everyone by staying away, but I was destroying the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to us. If you're still here through all this pain, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy to tell or hear, but sometimes we need to feel the darkness to appreciate the light. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their struggles. The turning point came when Ji Hune's grandmother did something unprecedented. She went to the hospital to see Temi herself. I was dozing in the chair beside Temi's bed when I heard the soft sound of expensive shoes on hospital linoleum. I looked up to see an elegant elderly Korean woman standing in the doorway, holding flowers and wearing the kind of traditional hanbok that spoke of old money and older values. "You must be Ada," she said in careful English. "I am Park grandmother. Ji Hune's family." I started to stand, to bow, to apologize, but she held up a gentle hand. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward Temi. My daughter was awake but listless, her fever finally broken but her spirit still dim. When she saw the grandmother, she managed a small smile. "Are you Daddy Ji Hune's mama?" Temi asked in her mixed Korean and English. "I am his grandmother," the elderly woman replied, and something in her voice was infinitely kind. "He talks about you very much." For the next hour, I watched this pillar of traditional Korean society sit beside my daughter's hospital bed, listening to her talk about Ji Hune with the patience of someone who understood love in all its forms. "She loves him," grandmother said to me as Temi dozed off. "Yes," I admitted. "And it's breaking her heart." "And yours?" I nodded, unable to speak. "And his," she said matter-of-factly. "So why are you all suffering?" "Because it's impossible. We're from different worlds." "My dear," she said with a smile that held decades of wisdom, "love doesn't care about worlds. It only cares about hearts." When Ji Hune finally found the courage to visit the hospital, he discovered his grandmother sitting with us, teaching Temi traditional Korean songs. The sight of them together, his family and ours, broke something open inside him. Family isn't about blood or background, I realized. It's about who shows up when it matters. 3 days later, Ji Hune did something that shocked the entire business community. He called an emergency board meeting, but instead of apologizing or making excuses, he stood up for what mattered. "I've built this company into what it is today," he began, his voice steady and strong. "But I've learned that success without people to share it with is just expensive loneliness." The board shifted uncomfortably, sensing this wasn't going to be the capitulation they'd expected. "Ada and Temi have taught me what family means. If this company can't support its CEO having a personal life, if it can't accept that working mothers deserve respect regardless of their position, then it's not a company I want to lead." Chairman Lee leaned forward. "Ji Hune, you're being emotional." "I'm being human," he interrupted. "And I'm announcing a new company policy, support for employee families, including childcare assistance and cultural inclusion programs. If anyone has a problem with that, they can find another CEO." The room was silent. These powerful men had never seen their quiet, controlled CEO take such a stand. Meanwhile, grandmother had her own announcement to make. At the hospital, she formally invited Ada and Temi to the family's traditional Sunday dinner. "But grandmother," I protested, "people will talk." "People always talk," she said with a laugh. "The question is whether we give them something beautiful to talk about." That Sunday, Ji Hune's grandmother introduced us to Korean society not as the cleaning lady and her child, but as family. The message was clear: acceptance came from the top, and anyone who questioned it would be questioning her judgment. The following Monday, Ji Hune walked into Technova with Temi holding one hand and me holding the other. The office fell silent as we passed, but this time it wasn't with whispers of disapproval, it was with the recognition that something fundamental had changed. Everyone, Ji Hune announced at the morning meeting, I'd like you to meet my family. Temi, dressed in a beautiful hanbok that grandmother had bought for her, looked up at the room of executives and said in perfect Korean, my name is Temi, and this is my daddy. The Christmas party that year was unlike any tech nova had ever hosted. Instead of the usual stiff corporate affair, it was a celebration that included families, children, and multiple cultures. Temi, now speaking fluent Korean and teaching other children English, was the star of the evening. When it came time for the traditional family presentations, Ji Hune stood up with his arm around me, Temi perched on his shoulders. 3 months ago, he began, I thought I knew what success meant. But this little girl taught me that the greatest achievement isn't building a company, it's building a family. Temi leaned down from his shoulders and whispered something in his ear. He smiled and nodded. Temi wants to say something, he announced. In her clear, confident voice, she addressed the room in both Korean and English. My daddy says family is people who love you no matter what. Thank you for loving our family. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including grandmother's, who was beaming with the pride of someone who'd been right all along. Sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected places. A child's innocent mistake became the beginning of the most beautiful love story, not just between two hearts, but between 3 souls who found home in each other. Today, Temi is learning to read in 3 languages. Ji Hune has revolutionized Technova's work-life balance, making it a model for other Korean companies. And I've learned that love doesn't ask permission from society, it simply exists, pure and transformative. And that's how a little girl's search for a daddy became the story of how we all found our way home. Temi is learning to read in 3 languages. Ji Hune has revolutionized Technova's approach to work-life balance, making it a model for other Korean companies. And I've learned that love doesn't ask permission from society, it simply exists, pure and powerful and transformative. And that's how a little girl's search for a daddy became the story of how we all found our way home.